for coming. Today we have Mr. Faisal Saeed al-Mutar and Dr. Muhammad Fraser-Rahim, and we'll be talking about, or they will be talking about, counter-extremism in the age of polarization that we live in today. So, you guys just want to go ahead and get started? Or?
Sure. Well, thank you all for coming, thanks for the sponsor of making this happening, and thank you, University of North Carolina, for giving us the space. So, the subject of today's event is really talking about extremism in this extremely polarized world, and by polarized world I mean the world of the Muslim world internally, and the world of and the relationship between the Muslim world and outside externally. So, Muhammad was born in the States, and he works all over the place. I was born in Iraq. I also work all over the place, and I think that both of us have experiences that are worth talking about. And I'm going to be more the interviewer here because he knows his shit more than I do. But what I would like to comment is really what have been my experiences here in the States dealing with the issue of extremism, in particular Islamic extremism, but also dealing with other forms of extremism as well. So. I've been in the States roughly about 6 years now. I can speak with some authority because I've been consulting and working in many organizations that are related to counter-extremism and the human rights, mostly focused on the Middle East, but at the same time we're opening up to the United States. I run an organization myself called Ideas Beyond Borders, which is focused on preventing extremism before it takes root. So I'm focused on extremism. Muhammad runs Quilliam North America, which is also focused on extremism. So one of the main things that I found in talking about extremism and Islamic extremism in particular is that when I talk, people say like, "Oh, this is something happening overseas." Like you're from Iraq, that's the Middle East right there. The last time we had a terrorist attack was 9/11. There is not much going on. There are bigger issues we have to deal with domestically. Some others will say that. So they view Islamic extremism as kind of an issue of the outside. It's a foreign problem. And for those who are more the libertarian, anti-interventionist type, so I'm debating tomorrow at GW, I'll probably make this argument is that this is a problem overseas. And so actually let's start with that. What are like some of the issues you have faced in talking about Islamic extremism? And do you get a similar comments like this? Is that this is not an issue here, like focused elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that this is the really challenging issues that I think within the American Muslim community and in the broader Muslim community, there's this conversation of, does this have everything to do with Islam, or does this have nothing to do with Islam? And I think at least the angle with Quilliam is, and we've been doing this for well over a decade, is that it's probably somewhere in the middle. It's the same issue that one is dealing with, unfortunately, the issue of black on black crime. Is it something we want to talk about? No. Is it taking place? Yes. And so then you have the politics that go into this as well, and how that plays out. So with the issue of sort of Islamist extremism, for us, we've called it out, we've addressed it head on, and say that those who are part of these communities have to also be responsible as well. It's just like if you have a child who's addicted to whatever foreseen drug, you have to recognize that has to be addressed, because if you're not, then it will continue to take place, and unfortunately someone can be killed from that as well. So for us, we've been engaging in this conversation. And for me, I've seen it from, as a former government intelligence officer working on counterterrorism issues, supporting the White House, the National Security Council. I did it for over 12 years. And I've also seen it from, as a practitioner, I worked at U.S. Institute of Peace trying to promote peace building. I don't know how much peace we actually did.
That'll work out.
It was an interesting journey. And then also I teach at the Citadel, so I've seen it in an academic sense. And I think that's a balanced approach. That you can call out that we have to engage real counterterrorism issues when we need to, but we also have to look at it from a local practitioner approach as well. And I think, unfortunately, that nuanced conversation isn't taking place, because there are individuals who, unfortunately, are not willing to address it heads on. And I think, ultimately, as Americans, too, as well, we have the responsibility to engage it from a position of values. There's a certain amount of values as Americans that we have, that we want to articulate and that we see as important. So the work that I've seen it from different angles, working in the government space and then also having been out and particularly dealing with Quilliam, where we are not just busy, the fact that we've expanded outside of the UK and we're in the US, and for the past year and 8 months, we're dealing with individuals that we're rehabilitating. Right now, and I have live individuals we're working with that we are rehabilitating. They're not just Islamists, they're also other individuals who are nationalists in other forms. So we're dealing with this in multiple lenses.
I mean, these people that you're dealing with are people who are born and raised here, or are they from the outside?
So from the individuals that we've dealt with, they are from, this is interesting when we talk about the outside, right?
Yeah.
So you have these hyphenated, are we talking about ethnic groups who are individuals who are second, third generation?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Are there individuals who are born in the United States? Absolutely, too. And the fact that we do work both domestically and overseas, we're constantly negotiating and experimenting and learning. I mean, our work is global. We're in Africa and Central Asia.
Yeah.
We're also in the U.S. too.
Yeah, so this is exactly what I'm saying there. So one of the other commentary that I've gotten was, because there is some history of racism that is undeniable against minorities within the present or the past, and Muslims are viewed, and they are a minority in America. They're a majority worldwide. They are the second largest religion after Christianity, if you consider Christianity to be Catholicism and Protestantism. But it is viewed as a minority religion and a minority culture. And now with kind of the rise of intersectionalism, when you have, let's say, like a brown Muslim, then these are two identities that are under attack, quote unquote under attack, and probably a black Muslim, etc. And what I've been countering, because like I would say, I mean, I've recently written an article about this, and this might sound kind of awkward saying this is a land of free speech in a way. I found the discussion about Islam in the Middle East far more honest than here. I think that like there are, maybe because of the homogeneous situation of race, we don't actually have a discussion about race, and if there is one, I mean obviously there is racism in the Middle East, is that people are not familiar with it, so they're not subconscious about the conversations that are happening about race and identity in the United States.
I don't want to tell you about my time being in Egypt and being Abid and Zan.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So I mean, racism there on a much higher level.
Yeah.
But when people discuss about Islam, they don't view it as a religion of a minority faith. It's because it's a majority faith.
Yeah.
So like you don't hear like somebody critical of Islam in Iraq will be called racist for criticizing Islam. But so as a result here, I found that there are so many landmines that you actually have to navigate. And one of the things that you have to tiptoe on is really the accusation of racism. Our friend Majid Nawaz has been accused of being racist and bigoted, and so what, and so many others within the Muslim community and sometimes outside. So what's your how to navigate this kind of like Iraqi-Iran border situation?
So I mean, it's a good one. As a historian by training, I can't help but throw out statistics, which will be helpful. The American Muslim community 2017 data poll that came out by Pew said that the American Muslim community is multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and there's no one particular interpretation that is more prevalent than another. So I think just as much as there are diversity within American Christianity, American Judaism, American Buddhism, American Hinduism, American Muslims aren't all the same. And in fact, the American Muslim community has multiple expressions of what it means to be Muslim in America, right? We're now having the emergence of, certainly we know there's conservatism, but there's cultural Muslims, there's secular Muslims, and I think in that space, I mean, as a third generation African American Muslim too as well. I mean, everyone knows a Malcolm X, they hear about Muhammad Ali, and that's about all they know from there. But even within the African American Muslim community spaces, there's multiple different sort of interpretations of how people express themselves. So I think that first and foremost, that conversation within the American Muslim community, which I'm probably leading of a point that you're going to probably mention too as well later, is that the early Muslim community in America were enslaved Africans who came here, and they weren't coming with a sort of a literalist interpretation of Islam. They were actually pretty chilled out, non-violent, working on the American plantation in the South. I grew up in Charleston, so those stories you can go look up. But I think that narrative is also not seen in the mainstream as well, because the public perception of what it means to be Muslim in America, unfortunately now, is a very much foreign, immigrant, Arab, no offense, Desi, Indo, Pakistani, etc. And I think that the more you can have multiple expressions that there is not this acceptable Muslim, whatever that looks like, and that not all Muslims are liberal, that they are conservative, that they are Republican, that they, etc. That voice and articulation should be not only encouraged, but that should be celebrated as well, because that's part and parcel toward the American expression too as well.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, the Arabs also have their own version of slavery as well, and which I think unfortunately is still not taught a lot in the Arab world. I mean, I don't believe in any politics. I'm not going to apologize for that, but it's sad to see it still happening. And so that's actually very interesting. I mean, I've heard some elements within organizations that are well known in the United States. So when they try to invite a Muslim speaker, especially on the women's side, I think as males, like there's no visibly Muslim way as a male. I mean, most Muslims wear dress the same way we do, except like in tribal Arabia, they wear differently. But I've heard like in an organization, one of them, Women's March, for example, have made it a requirement that if we're going to bring a Muslim speaker, she has to be wearing a headscarf. Isn't that kind of a form of?
I think that's interesting, right? Because you're having an internal conversation. First of all, what style of headscarf are we talking about too, right?
Yeah.
So there's this one notion of a particular style of a headscarf, right? Which is certainly putting things in a box. Two, how about if someone who doesn't wear a headscarf, or who just wears it for prayers and takes it off? Someone who doesn't want to wear one at all. But that nuance it's not even that nuance is not even shown. And I think that so often that, when people are looking for that acceptable Muslim, it is the hijabi woman, and it's a very packaged way. So I mean I would turn that back onto you as a question too as well. Like, so where do you go from there? Who's the alternative?
Well, I mean,
it doesn't have to be.
I mean, it makes me sad in a way that this kind of nuanced conversation has not made it, right? Because it's like you would assume that in the kind of the age of the internet and the age of knowledge, this century, the age of knowledge there is still kind of this racial, not necessarily racial, but the headscarf situation is like the head is like, if you go walk on the streets of Lebanon or Cairo, and maybe Cairo is not the best example, but many parts of the Arab world, there are many Muslim women who don't wear a headscarf. Yes, it's in some cases, like it's in Egypt, it is probably 60% of women, but generally, like, the stereotype actually doesn't fit. I mean, yes, we're not, the Arab world is not much of a liberal society, but at the same time, actually, in fact, many people don't see it as a correlation between liberalism, and there are some conservative Muslim women who wear a headscarf or don't wear a headscarf. So it depends on the interpretation, as you said. I mean, how do you go from there? Is because while I said I'm sad, it's a problem that needs to be acknowledged, and I'm kind of doing my part, and it's really kind of open up the diversity of these voices, including the voices that I disagree with. I mean, there are so many voices that you and I know probably, in which but at the end of the day, it's that diversity of ideas and that open debate is what is important, not the ideas probably themselves. So one of the other projects that I run is called the Global Conversations, has about roughly 1.5 million reach in 185 countries. We highlight many of these voices, including the ones that we disagree with, and really if you look at the page, it's the Global Conversations. That used to have a former name, which is a secular name, but most of it is what I post is just thoughts. Really, I just ask for thoughts. I don't try to impose my own opinion, even though I'm an Arab, but I'd like to be a dictator once in a while. But I like to open it up for people to have that conversation, and I think that's what we can do on an organizational level. Do you think there is a room for the U.S. government when it comes to that, or do you think this is kind of? I know there's others I would like to talk about. Do you think that this is like a government? Is it a government solution, or do you think of it as kind of societal individual responsibilities, those of us who come from the Muslim community should do it, or should like everybody from the outside should do it as well?
Yeah, you know, coming from government, maybe this is the ghost of my government past, is that I'm not interested in sort of government mandating and guiding that conversation. It's not organic. Government has a role. It has its place. It's certainly important. I've been part of those conversations. But what I also think is that civil society, ordinary citizens, religious community, university settings like this and higher education need to be part of that dialogue to figure out creative ways to address real world problems. And that's why I've kind of had my hand in many different pots, because I recognize like that coalition building is vital more than ever.
Of course, yeah.
And unfortunately, this space isn't, or in many spaces, is so closed off. Getting to what you mentioned earlier too as well, is that I think that you know, some of the efforts that we've been doing is on the issue of critical thinking. So it seems very sort of base for many individuals, like, oh, let's just have a good conversation and critically analyze issues. But that conversation isn't always happening in many communities.
Yeah.
We've done extensive work in West Africa for the past year, and you'd be surprised that even the discussion of the Socratic method, throwing an idea out and brainstorming and trying to co-construct a solution, that seems pretty simple and easy. But imagine if you're in a conflict zone that's not necessarily used to that open, free range conversation. So we've been leading the way on that, on top of some of the real kind of hard work, which is sort of DRAD and demobilization, rehabilitation, which has to get done because there are really sort of some bad people who are doing some bad efforts. And then what happens when they get locked up? Are they getting the assistance they need? So we've been trying to have this kind of conversation with multiple different voices to facilitate sort of openness and tolerance. It's not easy.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
And then particularly when you're dealing with religious communities, in particular, it can be very difficult because everyone has a view. And oftentimes a lot of those views are culturally imposed on top of what they perceive as religiously mandated thoughts too as well.
So speaking of religion, I thought I'm going to go off
Sure.
these questions. What do you think the role of the mosques in that conversation? I mean, generally speaking, when 9/11 attack was probably like kind of when Bush brought in these leaders of, I think, many mosques in Washington D.C. to be kind of the representation of the Muslim community. Do you think it's like what do you think the role of the mosque should be? And are the mosques should be the representation of the Muslim community, or should we talk to the poet, or should we talk to the musician? Right. Obviously he may not, the musician might not be singing about Islam all the time, but he's part of. What do you think is like, who should we reach out to, or are the mosques where the conversation should happen the most, or is the outside world is the place to go?
Yeah, I think the mosque is one place, but it's not the only place. People need community centers. They need a safe space. You probably heard this rise of unmosqued third spaces where people can express themselves because they aren't feeling like, hey, if I come in there, I'm going to be judged, right?
Yeah.
So that's certainly probably in the Middle East, it's in Africa, it's in the United States as well. So people want to be able to come to locations just like you see a rise of evangelical Christianity, where young people are listening to music and they're able to express themselves. Maybe in the conservative American Muslim space, that might not be taking place yet. But what I will say is that there are slow movements of groups of people who are like, you know what? We have concerns, we have issues, and we want to be able to express them in a safe environment. I think that should be expressed and encouraged just as much as individuals have spaces where they are looking for religious devotion in Muslim sort of Muslim spaces, which are oftentimes obviously mosques. But I would not say, and I think those are the only solutions at all. I think, as your point, poets and arts and culture, that's been part and parcel of spreading traditions. The most famous poet that everyone talks about in America that's stripped out of religion is who? Rumi.
Rumi, yeah.
They're very famous Coleman Barks. And
too bad Leonardo DiCaprio did not play that.
Oh, I know.
Just for those of you who don't know, there was a backlash against that because Leonardo DiCaprio is white, and they were saying that Rumi is Middle Eastern, even though Leonardo DiCaprio is Italian, so he's actually just across the Mediterranean. But I think people Let's put it back into politics. Let me see how much time do we have. I think we have some. So back to my experiences in America, and I'm not actually looking for validation. So you can you can push hard. From my experience is that I look at there is a contradiction on the left when let's say there is an attacker who claims to be a white supremacist, and he say things on Reddit and he's an incel, blah blah. And when he commits a terrorist attack, many people on the left directly see the link between, oh, he was influenced by Richard Spencer or a far-right ideology. They immediately make the direct connection. While this gets backlash from the right, they will say, no, guns don't kill people with guns kill people, and the people who are doing it are a bunch of sociopaths. They don't have any ideology that is motivating them. Obviously, I'm not talking about all the right, but hashtag not all. So on the left, it's different when it comes to Islam. The attacker, when he says like, I am here motivated by Islam, whatever that interpretation is, they will say this guy is a sociopath. He's not motivated by any ideology, which is kind of the same thing what happens the white supremacist commits and the occurs on the right. And as a result, so those of us who kind of claim that there is some connection, whether it's some, whether it's all, I think I'm more on your side, is that we get the baggage that comes with it, with the right? So now we get accused of being hypocrites for not calling out the white supremacists, even though we generally do. I don't think the white supremacists actually like us that much. I don't think Iraqis are on the top list there. But like back to the kind of the subject of tiptoeing, right? Is that I came here like 6 years ago, and I'm seeing this kind of contradictions all the time, and as a result, I found like kind of many people on the right are the ones making the connections of ideology and action. When I say that, and then I get attacked as a member of the right, even though I'm not much familiar with American domestic politics. Actually, I don't comment on it that often. So as a result, all of the baggage comes with it, and we're viewed as a result as talking heads of the right. So now it's like, let's say if I make the connection, then I'm associated with Dick Cheney, and I'm associated with the Iraq War and Donald Rumsfeld and all these people that I'm not a big fan of either. So how do you navigate that? Like this is I think.
So we won to the tune of $3.75 million because of an event like this. If you're not familiar, the Southern Poverty Law Center labeled our founder Majid Nawaz as an anti-Muslim extremist, and it was unfounded and it was baseless. They used fake quotes, right? There was some. Yeah, I mean, there were not real quotes posted there. The information was, it was not well researched. As any good analyst, they would have done their homework, right? Particularly when you're dealing with primetime individuals who know what they're doing and talking about. And so, unfortunately, this labeling, a characterization of being anti-Muslim or Islamophobic, this alliance and what they assume was with individuals who are Islamophobic, and you can pick whoever you want to, whether it's Pam Geller, etc., was this labeling, and then those who did not like the acceptable or what they thought as the type of Muslim who everyone's kumbaya, we're all agreeing, and we're not pushbacking, they didn't like that.
Yeah.
They all came together and were like, hey, Quilliam, Majid is labeled as this organization. And so thanks to wonderful partners and just resilience and truth, we were able to engage this conversation, and we stuck with it. And we found out, and we won a settlement agreement, $3.75 million, and a public apology by the Southern Poverty Law Center. I mean, this organization is one that my family supported and gave money for, based in Alabama, who defeated the KKK.
Yeah.
And so, I think that this not only is a vindication, forget about that, this is not time to gloat, but what it shows is that there's nuance that has to take place, right? And we were the results of this. This affected a lot of our work. I run our efforts in North America, based in Washington, and it directly affected. And so what now everyone wants to call, everyone wants to reach out, everyone wants to communicate with us. Because they realize, not just once, not just twice, at least 3 times, we've had a number of situations we've pushed back, and we have been at the forefront to lead the charge against extremism and also to provide that nuance understanding. Here I am, former government, served my country, been everywhere in all over the Middle East, those wonderful places that you've named in Iraq and Afghanistan, etc., and served my country, and then that labeling. And I come from a Muslim background. I am Muslim. And Quilliam works on this, but we also know how to call things out when they need to be done. And I think that's important. That's important more than ever, that people are honest, and that we also recognize too as well that we're Americans too as well. And we stand firm on that position as Americans but American Muslims. So we push back against that, and some of those, as we call them, some of the haters have, they'll still come back, but we still have to challenge and stay engaged on them as well.
Actually, going back and going outside these questions, I mean, there has been many efforts by, how to say, established Muslim organizations in the States to say it's like, don't work with the FBI, don't work with the FBI. I mean, you just mentioned that, like, you are an American Muslim, but so you saw, oh wow, the power of the Lord. Cool, thank you. It's like they see it as so. In fact, I should forget about the American Muslim organizations. Like, I take a lot of Ubers, unfortunately, because I travel a lot. But I've engaged in like many conversations of people who, I would say, born here. I mean, I go to lots of events about Iraq in New York, and you hear like a guys like, where are you from? Like, you hear like wearing like a Iraqi pin. Some of them wearing like a Saddam pin.
Wait a minute, I just noticed something.
Oh yeah, well, they say the same watch.
The same watch with the everything.
Cool.
Sorry.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, and then like I asked them, I was like, where are you from? The typical question, right? And they're like, I'm from Iraq. I'm like, where are you from Iraq? And he's like, I'm from Queens. Like, no, there's no Queens in Iraq. I mean, I've been there. I've been to Queens. They have good food, but they're not part of Iraq. And so that says something, right? It's like, obviously, this one person is obviously biased. He was a dumping. He obviously had his dad was probably with this former regime, but and I don't think this is a big issue in America yet. It's exaggerated, but many people on the far right, they say like, oh, everybody must, like, the shawarma guy wants to commit a terrorist attack. No, it's not that bad. But I found it kind of troublesome, right? So this guy was born here, born and raised here, speak with completely American accent, and at the same time, just back to what he said. He said, America invaded my country. America invaded my country in 2003. By the way, we're talking about a guy born and raised in Queens. And he sees himself as being invaded by the country he was born at, to the country that his parents are from. So how do you see this? Is this a big issue from your experience and expertise? Is this a big issue you're facing a lot? And kind of this identity subject is that, okay, so are we American first, Muslim second? Is there actually first or second, or are they like kind of molded like a tabbouleh in which everything is mixed up?
You know, I think that at the funeral and the memorial of Muhammad Ali, the eulogist mentioned that Muhammad Ali was able to knocked out the idea of being both American and Muslim, right? He was agitated and certainly resisted against elements that weren't certainly the best, particularly in the experiment of the 50s and 60s and 70s, etc. But he also was like, hey, this is my country and I'm part of it, and everyone knows him throughout the world, right? And I think that is an interesting sort of story with individuals who have been attracted to extremism, who offer a very compelling narrative. It's important to recognize extremists offer some legitimate viewpoints. They take it in a very twisted, narrow pathway, and then they're able to loop someone in, and just like drugs, and then they catch them and they've hooked them into their ideology. So we can't dismiss extremists as all being sort of wackos. We know that there's challenges, but they offer and they are able to tap into grievances that some of them are legitimate. This isn't just me saying go do the social science research and it's proven. There's a number of scholars who've talked about this, but I think that
and this grievance can be false, but it's also believed to be true, right?
Exactly.
So it's like even if it's not a real grievance, but if someone believes it's a grievance, they think it's a part of the grievance.
Real and or perceived.
Or perceived,
right? Real and or perceived grievances that are out there. And so you have individuals who may be who are susceptible, who are vulnerable, who are looking for a cause, who are looking to join what I call the United Colors of Benetton of terrorism, right? ISIS, Daesh, Al-Qaeda and Islamic, Maghreb, Taliban, they fit the bill. Raqqa has fallen, what's next, right? So these extremist groups are able to tap into that, and they give what I characterize like an Islamic zeitgeist. It's an Islamic, it's the Islamic moment of the day, the Islamic moment of the time, just like the Germans were engaging, and they were able to catch the pulse.
Yeah.
So they're able to tap into things using religion and a framework that says, guess what? You don't have that job, you don't have those resources, you don't have that, and they're able to say, well, even though I was born here, yeah, those still are my people. And so, it's sort of an identity crisis.
Yeah.
It's this cognitive dissonance. Like, where am I? Who am I? And how do you reconcile through that? I mean, it's a negotiation through that space.
Yeah.
So I think that not just him, but many others have been playing with this idea, and they're trying to find their voice. I think there's enough examples to say how you can be integrated and how you can reconcile being both American and Muslim and not picking and choosing and hyphenating. You can just be American as a nation of immigrants, of diversity and expression, but there's certain rules and regulations of what it means to be an American, right? You can still critique, you can agitate. The First Amendment, the Second, the Third, etc. The right to bear arms is part of our binding legal framework. That should be encouraged until something changes. That's what we all agreed on as a collective.
Yeah.
view.
I just remember we're in the South.
So
in New York, the Second Amendment is debatable.
Exactly, it's debatable. But you get my point, right? And so I think that as Americans, you can critique, but it's within an agreed set of terms. And so I think that once you go outside that confines, then you get individuals like Najib al-Azazi, you get Umar Mateen, you get the Tsarnaev brothers, etc. You get the Proud Boys, which are the new groups that are popping up in the resignation of one of the Proud Boys leaders.
Actually, I mean, you work with Quilliam, and Quilliam is UK, let's say founded, but now international. Do you see the US is heading towards a better direction in kind of this kind of identity crisis because it's a nation of immigrants? Because it's always a view that the UK is like kind of the motherlode of bad ideas and kind of extremism.
Well, London's multiculturalism as well, right?
But they say like one of the reasons why the UK has more extremism than the US is because the identity of being a British does not include the kind of let's say the Indo-Pak or the Muslim. While in America, it's kind of a nation of immigrants. So do you think this is a valid argument? Do you think that this is what that means is that it's going to be less likely to have cases like this, or do you think that because of now Trump is in power and kind of this identity politics coming from the left or some elements of the left, do you think that the Muslims are now cornered in a way? It's like they either have to choose being an American or they have to choose being a Muslim?
I think the U.S. is better off, no question, than our European counterparts. One, proximity to the battlefield historically. Also, the American Muslim communities, our institutions are stronger, and we have, I think, much more participation. I'll say that, and maybe we can engage later about some of our recent Muslim elected officials that are interesting in terms of different from some of the historical or other individuals who were elected to Congress, to Muslim men. I think, where are things going? I think the American, I think that the space in America allows for this ikhtilaf, differences of opinion, but unfortunately, it's within a box of what individuals see as acceptable. It's like gatekeepers.
Yeah, so it's kind of ironic in a way.
Yeah,
right?
it's kind of ironic, right? So you have gatekeepers based off of individuals who say this is the rules and this is what we need to do, right? So many of the organizations, I don't see anyone from MSA, right? So there's a Muslim Student Association, right? It would have been great for them to be here, right? For a dialogue to be able to engage. But, there are multiple different expressions and multiple different groups who are out there who should be encouraged. So to make a long story short, I'm optimistic that I think in the American Muslim community that there is a space for people to be themselves. I think it's I think it's different from our European counterparts, from Belgium, from Netherlands. I was just in Copenhagen last month,
Yeah.
and they're dealing with real issues of people talk about reintegration, but what happens when people weren't even integrated in the first place? So I think that's a whole.
I've been to Copenhagen to talk about the same.
Wow, I didn't even know that. Look at that. So the whole issue of the whole issue of integration becomes a major problem, or a major conversation starter for many people too as well, who from the first place aren't able to get the same legal dynamics. I think in America, there's so many communities that have been here, and so the argument to say that because in this case, if you're on the left, you might not agree with Trump's policies and position in our democratic process. Everyone has a process to be able to vote individuals in, and you can vote someone out. And so I think that this is interesting where things will go. There's so much more I can say on that, but I'll leave it there.
So let's go overseas for a bit. So one of the actually, let's start with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And there has been this fuss, as you know, that MBS is a reformer, and one of the main arguments that's being used, the subject of Islam, is that if the reformation is to happen in Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of the Muslim Americans, Muslim Europeans, Muslim South Asians, who are, by the way, the majority, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Arabs are a minority within the Muslim world. They're only 300 million, while South Asians make 1.2 billion. I think 1.1 billion. So I mean, do you think this is a valid claim? Number one, and number two, one of the back also subject of being American and non-American is that if Saudi Arabia is also known as the main sponsor of Wahhabi Salafism, jihadism that's spreading around the world, one of the criticism of America, which I think is kind of a valid criticism, is that if the U.S. is trying to fight extremism, trying to fight terrorism, how come they're allied with the major sponsor of extremism around the world? So as a result, many people say that the United States is not serious about fighting extremism. If you're going to fight extremism, go where the source is, or at least one of the sources, not many. So my first question is that is this a valid claim that if a reform is to happen, it's going to happen in the Mecca and Medina and whatever, whoever the guardian of these places are, or should it even actually start with the Middle East, or should it actually start from places outside the Middle East and maybe they will influence the Middle East? So that's the first question. And my second question is like kind of the U.S.-Saudi alliance, and many people being skeptical of kind of this world of extremism, of at least the American version of extremism. They were like, okay, these guys are hypocrites. On one side, they say we have to fight radical Islam, as Trump said. On the other hand, when they kill a journalist or they build a madrasa in Pakistan that at least many people join the Taliban, we give Saudi a free pass. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think that we will continue. First of all, reform. I think the West, and I think particularly in America, offers some really exciting glimmers of hope in terms of how integration, how diversity, how different viewpoints can come together, and people be challenged and pushed back. That could be very useful for co-religionists as American Muslims who could be teaching an example for their counterparts in the Middle East and the broader Islamic world. I'm very confident that I think there are some interesting new projects that will arise in the West. I mean, look, right now, many of the great texts from the Arab world are at Harvard and Yale. They're Ivy League institutions. They're not in the Middle East. And what do people from the Middle East do? They want to study in America or the broader Western world. And when individuals who are from X, Y, and Z location in the Middle East, when they need to get medical surgery, they're going to Johns Hopkins University. So I think there's a brain drain leaving the Arab world. So there could be a drain of thought that might be originating in the West that could offer some interesting ways of, should I say, renovation, renewal,
Renaissance,
revivalism. I'm trying to cover all my bases for those who want to critique. Should we say revivalism? but I think that's what's taking place.
Yeah.
I think the Western framework offers some interesting engagement for American Muslims and others to learn from too as well. That the center of gravity isn't just in the Arab world.
Exactly.
There's a lot to learn from there. I studied extensively there. I loved it. It was great. But there's a center of gravity also in perhaps in Indonesia, maybe, in Malaysia,
which is the largest Muslim country.
Largest Muslim country. In some African countries too as well. So I want us to consider that. In terms of U.S.-Saudi relations,
I mean, just to add, if whatever term we're going to use, Renaissance, revival as well, that if that thing to happen, it needs to happen in a place where free speech is allowed.
Absolutely.
Right? Because otherwise, if anybody going to make a comment and they get beheaded, then this is not an equal space for debate, as is the case in many countries in the Middle East. Maybe Tunisia is now a kind of rising example that is allowing diversity of that.
Absolutely.
But I think the rest of the Arab world, I mean, if the government is not going to kill you, maybe a militia will. So
exactly.
So there is no room for that conversation. That being said, there are many brave people, and I think many of us know, are still going on the news and going on talk shows talking about this, knowing that actually some of them might get killed tomorrow, but they still go and say it, and I think they deserve our respect. I just want to add that. And the second question.
No, actually, just the other piece to the first question too as well. People forget too as well that when the caliphs in the sort of historical Islamic period, when the taxes were flowing in, there's a lot of expression that could be allowed. I mean, you could be extremely, maybe not religious at all, not even into religion, to being very conservative, and that was fully expressed.
Yeah.
But when the taxes were a bit more restricted and money was not coming in, then you see a rise of conservatism. So I think history gives us wonderful examples. The Art of Party Crashing in Iraq, wonderful book that talks about just the Baghdad being also a party place too as well. Very interesting conversation.
But it still is kind of.
Still is, right? Yeah.
That's how I get this first.
So, and then the second part to the war, I think in terms of U.S.-Saudi relations, listen, this is a strategic ally. MBS is a young individual who is still negotiating through the space of geopolitics 101. And at this point, the relationship with the U.S. And Saudi Arabia isn't changing anytime soon. We have to engage them in the region too as well. And I think, quite frankly, the Saudis, and particularly MBS, I think he's keenly aware of what's taking place. The reason why I say this, and just looking at it from sort of a geopolitical strategic element of it, they recognize that they have to diversify their economy. They're building a new city.
The 2030 vision.
2030 vision that has to that will be including outsiders, not just Muslims. Probably following the Dubai model, right, or a UAE model.
Yeah.
And I think that
maybe Singaporean model.
Singaporean model. And so I think that one has to that they're keenly aware of that, and also that historical, maybe 50, 60-year agreement between the royal family and then the Saudi religious establishment of saying, hey, you do your thing, we do our thing. They clearly are trying to reel that back in to at least say, maybe we need to be a little bit more, maybe we left some folks unchecked. I'll add one last thing too as well to consider, and I know it gets a little controversial, but I think it's something important to highlight.
I love controversial.
Well, I'll say this, and I think, roughly, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, do you know how much money the global Muslim world spends on Hajj? Just give a stab, roughly.
One of the Uber drivers told me that it costs $10,000 to go from New York to Mecca. that's per person.
Yeah,
because like the hotels are like Four Seasons and all of these fancy hotels around Mecca, so it's actually much expensive than I thought.
Very different. So roughly, let's just say I've heard numbers anywhere between 8.5 billion.
Okay.
Let's just say there's a lot.
Right?
We can at least agree on millions.
Right?
So hundreds of $millions is coming in. So the question is whether you agree or those on the left have a very, very strong position on the whole BDS, which we're not going to get into, right? But my thing is, if you really have a strong position on that, then are you willing to give up some of your Hajj money and not go in light of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi?
You're asking Muslims.
Yeah. Right? Because that's a real fundamental. That's a real question, right? Are you willing to do that? I'm not saying I'm not taking sides on doing that or not, but I'm saying if you have issues too as well, then you might want to realizing that your Hajj money went to support efforts.
I mean, what I would do as a counter argument is that many at least in many Muslim countries, don't even have a free speech. They don't view Jamal Khashoggi killing as something extraordinary, right? So it's like there are journalists, like for example, I mean the irony of Erdogan kind of going after the Jamal Khashoggi investigation. It's kind of ironic. I mean Turkey, for those of you who are familiar with the Freedom House, which ranks countries on freedom of speech, freedom of press, all of that, Turkey went downhill over the past 5 years.
Along with the lira too as well.
Yeah.
Right?
So they arrest journalists, they kill journalists, they kill politics, and I mean they are in no place whatsoever to criticize Saudi Arabia. Not that I'm a fan of Saudi Arabia, but I think so. This could be one argument.
Yeah.
I mean the only probably Muslims who can do that, who at least live in countries in which maybe Indian Muslims who also have 300 million, maybe more. I mean I'm sure they're a big market.
Yeah, sure.
And Muslims who live in the West, who live in French society. But yeah, that could be.
But I don't,
so you're saying that financial pressure.
Yeah, financial pressure
will modernize Saudi Arabia in a way.
I don't have a sort of stake in this, but I'm just saying I think that these are things to consider, right?
Yeah.
If you have issues with this, then you also realize that you're contributing to something as well, right?
Yeah.
Because your money goes, and there's opulence and all that, all the wonderful things that the royal family is certainly benefiting. But I just want people to understand that, right? At a very base level too as well, is that you can impact that. So that's a separate conversation that we're not going to engage in tonight, but just something to consider. But the U.S.-Saudi relationship is not changing anytime soon at all. And I think just in terms of it's sort of like a frenemy. You keep your enemies really close, or you keep them close. You keep them far enough. I mean,
I mean, it's obviously very tough. I mean, I may actually ask you two last questions, which is also related to a neighbor of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, right? So, I mean, I think there was an article on Foreign Policy that said that kind of this, how to say, war, not a war necessarily between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, has, because they're busy with each other in a way, it kind of opened the space for more people to have a conversation. Because now, I mean, Qatar is a major sponsor of the Brotherhood and the likes, and who have much more influence than the Saudis have, at least in terms of media. And because they're kind of been busy fighting each other, it's actually been kind of beneficial to the wider Muslim community. And do you think this battle will continue? I mean, it's some people think that there is kind of existential difference between Qatar and Saudi Arabia because they have completely supported different people, like Saudi Arabia Sisi and Qatar supported the Brotherhood, and kind of the case in Ahrar al-Sham and Syria, all of that. So yes, another question: what do you think of this Qatari Saudi shit show? And the other one is without giving it space, and whether this fight will continue or whether it's going to be two tribesmen sitting on a khayma, on a tent, and having a tea and maybe some chicken biryani, and then sort of.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think I think this will be worked out. I think probably in the near term too as well. I think there's just too many other hot issues, and what I've been saying too is what comes after ISIS too as well. So the individuals, we're going to have to figure this out.
That's a question,
right?
Too, yeah.
This is a real thing. Like, so what comes next? Secondly, too as well. I mean, the proxy elements that's taking place, whether it's Turkey aligning with Iran, it's like, what are they doing this for, right? I was talking to my students earlier today. They're like, Turkey with Iran? I don't get this. They're like, people work together for mutual beneficial purposes. You might not agree on everything. So that's one. I think, the Qatari, Saudi tensions, I think this will be figured out. I mean, I think there'll be some gentleman or Arab sort of chivalrous fatwa tradition that will be, sitting down and hopefully arbitrating in some way. I give it about 6 months. If I was a betting man, I don't bet, but if I did, I would put it out there like that.
So like by June next year.
I think so. But I think that the proxy elements aren't going away. I think with sanctions certainly being increased back with the Trump administration with Iran, I think you're going to see a tightening of grips. But Iran now has other partners to work with. The Chinese are certainly fair game, and they are willing to.
And Iraq in a way too.
And Iraq too,
because they're using Iraq as a kind of.
So it's interesting that now we have an opening of spaces in new alliances that can open up that maybe 3, 4, 5 during the Obama administration that might have not taken place for some of these groups or some of these countries to be a bit more confined. there's more I could say on this, but I think that kind of captures that part.
So I'm gonna ask probably the last question and then the second question just follow. So post ISIS, what should we? Speaking of betting, I do have one hypothesis is that actually that hypothesis has been challenged recently. The ecosystem for a group like ISIS to exist still exists. In Syria is the case. In Iraq, there's recently. I don't know if it's a symbol of anything, but they opened 2 hotels in Fallujah and Ramadi. What is Mabruk? Yeah, right. So what it says is that trade is happening. Right? There's commercial trade happening in these areas. Kind of the ecosystem that allows. Okay, here's the $300. Put an IED. Probably is not there. At least in Anbar province, where ISIS had a hit. Al Qaeda had a hit ISIS. In Mosul. Probably, I think, because most of Mosul people have already left. Now is Mosul place with Shia militias. So the ecosystem for ISIS to grow there is maybe unlikely. And I know you guys are going to try to do some work on that. Syria, Assad is winning somehow with Russia, with the help of Russia and Hezbollah on hand. So, there's argument that the ecosystem is still there for like ISIS 2.0 to maybe more brutal than, and that, I don't know. And back in the days when I used to talk about extremism, it used to be Al Qaeda, and now it's like, oh, the liberals are not there. So ISIS, so there's the hypothesis says there's ISIS 2.0 because kind of some elements of the ecosystem there's that, and there's element that says maybe not, maybe now because like both sides won, quote unquote, won. The Iraqi government with the help of Iraqi militias, I think Iraqi militias helped more, and then Syria with Assad. So there's kind of no room for another terrorist group to grow. Either the Sunnis are always all killed or they're all deported. So what do you think? Is there a post ISIS, positive, negative, whatever? I think we're talking about worse and worse. We're not talking about positive at all. So what do you think?
Think about it. Like it's like an adrenaline rush. It's like a high. The caliphate's already been achieved, right? Let's just use that. The caliphate
as a physical caliphate,
as a physical caliphate. So what do you do next after you've already been on the high, right? Where do you go next? This is.
Is this a cocaine reference or?
Perhaps, right? But so you've already achieved this. You've been able to sort of have some control and rule of law. You've been able to execute people, and you've been able to show that you had some relative normalcy, right? You're able to have like HISPA boards. You get the drift. Right? So my question is, okay, how do you keep that at that state? So if I put on my sort of analyst hat, I'm thinking, okay, is this going to be a local insurgency that's just going to spread not just in the in Iraq and Syria, but the broader Levant? Is it going to spread into other locations, which we have seen? Libya is still a concern that we need to not forget about. Also, Mozambique, there was an attack just yesterday. Individual who used the name of their al-Shabaab, loosely affiliated with al-Qaeda, loosely affiliated with ISIS.
Somalia had a terrorist attack.
Somalia as well. So you get the point. People are leaving one location, they learn from another. The Taliban is re-emerging too as well. Hamza bin Laden is taking the vanguard of his father's organization. So I think that the local insurgency is an interesting phenomenon for anyone who's studying military analysis, because what the local insurgency says, guess what? It's more local grievances, more local issues. It's using local languages. At a minimum, with high probability or medium confidence, if I'm putting my analyst hat on, there is at a minimum a local to global insurgency movements that are going to be operating with also, I think, more lethality, because when Qasasbi, the Jordanian pilot, was burned, that took it to a high level. Like, right, you can torture, and if you watch any Dabek and Inspire Me, the details. What do you do? It's like a thrill. What else more can you do? Do you incorporate CBRN? Do you do other forms of intimidation? Do you do more alliances between Islamist groups and maybe work collaborating with other ethno-nationalists? Wouldn't surprise me if you see people switch back and forth in cases too as well. So
Yeah, I mean, look at the Syrian conflict. You see that people switching sides every 50 minutes.
exactly.
I mean, recently not the Ahrar al-Sham, the Jaish al-Hur, the Free Syrian Army, have changed the flags. You see, like they changed the flag from the thing to.
When did they switch from yesterday to today?
No, that was like last week. Yeah, maybe today they
Exactly,
changed. Yeah,
right?
they changed the profile picture.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But you get the point,
yeah.
right? And so I think that for us, we're like policy wonks and dweebs studying this stuff. But I think that we're trying to find like, okay, what's going on? What are the trends? Because this is real life,
Yeah.
right? And this is directly impacting. We're in our cozy place in the United States, but it also has direct implications of what can happen right here in the United States, and certainly not insurgency, but in terms of the impact that it has, in terms of motivation, the appeal, the attraction.
Yeah, so this could be.
That.
It could be like. I mean, I have not yet known much about Bin Laden's son, but I mean, if he's charismatic enough, we actually have a problem, right?
Well, I don't know how much charisma, and he can't channel much of his father's, beer sees energy that's there. I mean, it's dead. But
generally, like the son of someone is generally worse than I mean, John Lennon is an example, but so is when it comes to Islamic extremism.
Exactly.
I don't think I think he might. I mean, his name is Bin Laden is still used as an inspiration by terrorists
Absolutely,
today.
yeah.
So I mean, it might be that his son name would still be an inspiration.
it's like name dropping, right?
Yeah.
Like you do that.
It's like my dad is Bin Laden, bro.
Exactly.
Like,
it's like credibility, street creds.
Yeah.
Within those circles, you know this, and it's a whole chain. And extremist circles that Arabs, you guys are like fascinated about silsila, the whole chain of transmission.
Yeah.
The same thing within extremist circles. Like, you study with him and him and him and him, and Abdul Suri. Wow.
Yeah.
You're like legit.
Yeah, it's street cred.
Yeah, street cred.
So yeah, I think this ends the conversation. I mean, I think we took more than it's now 8:15, so we probably took an hour, and I would like to open up to the audience. So thank you, Muhammad.
Our Arabic scripts.
And thank you all for listening. Thank you so much, Muhammad.
Thank you.
For those of you who have questions, or there's obviously lots of stuff to discuss.
Sure.
So you talked about how nuanced, kind of different, especially American Islam culture, and coming from it from kind of a conservative, political, anyways, often we look at Islam as either extremist or not.
Yeah.
So what are ways for that community and its nuances to kind of show themselves to conservatives, perhaps, who see it as just one or the other?
Sure.
What would you say are ways for that political standpoint to start embracing that?
So we'll give you a contact afterwards, one. But secondly, I think that, the amplifying those voices, and so people actually hear that platform. And I think you're right. A lot of people just don't know communities are existing. And there's multiple communities that are out there who have been advocating and saying, hey, some of these mainstream institutions, they're just that. They're mainstream institutions, but they aren't necessarily the only voices. So it's like if you go to a city, you need to know like who's the local guide at the city, right? Because otherwise you just hear about what you see on TV or that labeling. So I think there are wonderful partners that are out there that, will you agree with every single point? No, absolutely not. But you can agree and partner on common, you've probably heard me say this about 3 or 4 times, common values, right? And I think particularly that's important for the long term, right? In terms of security issues, we can agree on. We can, in terms of creating spaces where we can all function. We may disagree on maybe some theological issues. I'm just making that up, but that's okay. And so I think working with some of those groups and their partnerships that we work with, right? This is a perfect example, right? Of we were walking over and we're just saying, hey, we have this new effort. Let's work together. Our organization too as well, we partnered with one of the oldest Muslim communities and helped on a CVE. You may have heard of Preventing or Countering Violent Extremism. Those who've been on the very far fringes and the left have been like, oh, you shouldn't be doing this. Well, guess what? I come from government. I've worked in that space. Communities need support. And this is all of our taxpayer money. And anyone who's looked at the work we did, it's actually nonpartisan. It's great, and anyone would agree with it. But, unfortunately, people have this sort of labeling, and the acceptable Muslim, right, is a certain type, and you can find them, and go look at that, right, and go find them, and they want to be heard. Hello. But I think that the work that we've
And
been
they have PR agencies too.
Oh, they have great PR agencies too as well. So we've been working to try to get a little bit more, to work with multiple voices and play our small part. We aren't the only voice, but we are certainly one hell of a voice. Yeah.
Just to add to that, and you might actually correct me on this, is that as far as I know, before 9/11, there were more Muslim Republicans than Democrats, right?
I'm not sure the exact number, but there's certainly a large amount of
Muslim Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I mean, if you think about it, other than the extremism subject, I mean, social conservatism is not that different. I mean, if you talk to a socially conservative evangelical Christian and you talk to a socially conservative Muslim, generally they agree on 90% of the things.
Absolutely.
There might be some differences here and there because there are differences between the religions, but I think post 9/11 things kind of get more and more polarized. So as a result, the conservatives, let's say, the Republican Party, these things sometimes are different, is that to be associated with them is to be associated with the war on terror, to be associated with the enemies of Islam. So as a result, many of the voices that are showing up, including those who are coming from overseas, trying to navigate this ugly space, to be honest, trying to really tiptoeing on everything, is that, like, for those of us who are critics, etc., the first thing we get accused of is we're being a tool for the right wing. If not for the right wing, we're a tool for the Zionists. These are kind of like the two main arguments. So as a result, it's not not all, but I've seen it, to be honest, close to I mean, probably famous Sarah Haidar and some of the kind of the ex-Muslim types, is that they have to probably insult the Republican Party 100 times before they make any comment about Islam. Because they're like, I'm not right wing, I'm not, and they have to al-Rizvi in kind of a more hysterical way. They go bashing, sometimes even though they sometimes agree with the conservatives, but they have to quote unquote distance themselves, in which they bash back, make 100 tweets about Trump. They're Islam has these problems. So, because as a result, so that now it's many people are very afraid to even say be in any way associated with the right. And actually, it's kind of funny in a way. Most of that is not relevant if you are outside the United States. I mean, in the Middle East, maybe negatively or positively, they view America as the land of infidels. So whether it's a Republican funding or Democratic funding doesn't really matter. And even if those who view America in a positive light do not actually care if the money coming from Republicans or Democrats or conservatives or liberals. It's mostly an issue here. In a domestic manner, people have to navigate. But many people there don't know much about the differences even between what is a Republican and a Democrat and social conservatism, fiscal conservatism. It's not a discussion you see on Al Jazeera. It's how much taxes in North Carolina should be today? No one. I mean, yes, some people might know what happens in America, domestically, but most people what they know is shows like Friends and Seinfeld, and they see. When I came to America, I thought Chicago was a state. All I know from America was Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, and Washington D.C. That's four. That's all I know about America, because that's the only part of America I was introduced to. The rest is there is something in America, but that's most of what people know over there. And I'm from an elite kind of educated family, and because that's what we're getting introduced to. So I think this kind of tiptoeing, and then back to my conversation about people there being more honest and truthful, even though they are surrounded by much more danger, is that they don't have to navigate it through this I'm not associated with the right, I'm not associated with the left, I'm not with the progressives, I'm not with the alt-right, I'm not. There's all these 50,000 terms right now, and I cannot navigate anymore. I barely speak English. I don't know how to deal with that, but. Yeah, so this is kind of the issue that I think would be worth mentioning. We're good?
We're good? Well, thank you.
No, thank you.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for coming. Thank you, Muhammad.
Thank you very much.
Friends having conversations is always nice. Thank you.